And welcome back to episode 2 of Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2. This is our galaxy that we've created in the last episode, and now you can actually even see the orbits of every star around the galactic center here, which is something that we didn't see in the last episode, but now as soon as I restart the simulation, I can actually see the orbits, which is pretty awesome. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about Tatooine today, and Tatooine is located, so this is usually how you see this sort of a map. There's a galactic center in the middle, there's Coruscant right here, Alderaan, and Tatooine is in this region right here. It's in the outer rim, and it's actually hidden behind the star called Ea. And if I were to zoom into Ea, I would see that right next to it is a relatively insignificant dual star, which is really interesting because this is actually not one star, it's actually 2 stars. And they're both called Tatoo 1 and Tatoo 2. So that's essentially our Tatooine system. I didn't really finish completing this yet. We're going to finish this together. And Tatooine is orbiting around them. And, oh, surprisingly very cold though. We need to actually warm up Tatooine a little bit because it is actually the one of the hottest planets we get to experience in the movie, in the series. And of course, it kind of looks like Mars, which is why this is sort of Mars, but it's also Tatooine. Now, let's warm it up and start talking about Tatooine in Star Wars. Now let's talk about the actual solar system first. So as you can see, there are 2 stars and they create these really beautiful shadows on the surface of this planet. So instead of having just dawn, dusk, night and day, you actually have something like 8 different times of day. So here we actually have shadows forming on the surface, and we know that this planet only really has one part of the area somewhere in the north, specifically the North Pole area, where there is actually humans living in that area, because everything else is extremely hot and it's just too scorchingly hot to survive. So most of the life is in the northern part of the planet, which is why I shifted this planet so the north is actually more in the shadow in comparison to everything else. Now the interesting part here is that because there are 2 stars, I had to figure out how to make this a very stable solar system. So right now you can't really tell, even if I enable orbits, you won't really be able to tell what's going on, but I'm going to show you what's happening here by going to a different simulation. Now, one of these stars is very similar to our sun. It's relatively similar in brightness and relatively similar in shape and mass. It's a G-type main sequence star, but the other star is a little bit less bright. It's the red star you see in the movie, and let's just actually pick something that has a K-type that is a little bit less massive than that. Let's see if we can find one. And here's one called Orlanea, I think. It's a little bit smaller in size as well, and it's a little bit less bright and it's more red. So this is a K-type star. And now, interestingly, if I were to make them orbit in this fashion, so this is a binary system where both planets will be, both stars will be orbiting around each other. If I were to try to place a planet here, and this is one of the videos I've talked about in the past when I was talking about Sirius, I believe. If I were to try to place a planet like Mars somewhere at a distance of about 1.5 astronomical units, watch what happens. It's really difficult for a planet to actually orbit around a binary system where 2 stars are relatively close to one another. Now, in the movie, we know they're close because we can see this in the actual picture of Luke Skywalker looking at the stars. They look relatively close. And even though they will be fine orbiting around one another, if I were to accelerate this a little bit, you'll see what happens to Mars. Its orbit is going to destabilize until at some point it's just going to fly out and never return. And this is something I've been experimenting with for many times. And so I had to figure out how, what is the possibility of having Tatooine orbit in a very stable sort of position where it's, it has 2 stars, but yet it still has a somewhat stable orbit around them. Now, as you can see, this is increasing every time it passes by the stars, and at some point, I think after a few years maybe, it's going to very likely escape into the outer solar system. It happens every time. I've tried this many times, and the closer the stars, the more likely it's going to escape. But its orbit is slowly growing more elliptical and also a little bit more unpredictable than a normal orbit of a planet around a singular star. And you can see it changes so much. Now it's even more elliptical, and it's slowly moving farther and farther away from the star. So this is definitely not what we would have in Star Wars, obviously. And here we go. This is the escape of Mars, also known as Tatooine, from the solar system. All right, so that's not what's happening. So there must be something else. And what I've decided to recreate is this. So first of all, I've placed both Tattoo 1 and Tattoo 2 relatively far away from each other, so they actually have a stable but a far enough orbit of approximately 3 to 4 astronomical units. So this is one of the first things I decided to do, and then I placed the actual planet relatively close to the smaller star, so that it receives most of its radiative heat from the smaller star, but also gets a little bit of heat from the larger star, and this will also enable it to have a really stable orbit around it. So this way, it doesn't really get the gravitational effects from the Tatooine 2, but it does get it stays in orbit around Tatooine 1, but at the same time receives heat from both stars. And this will basically ensure that you get a really hot planet, but at the same time that this scene that you see in Star Wars where Luke Skywalker looks into the sky and sees both stars is also possible. And I'm going to show you how it's possible right here when we reach this particular stage in our orbit. And right around here we go. This is what, no, maybe a little bit more. Here we go. So this is the scene we see in the movie where we have the dark side of the planet, but then on the bright side, if you stand on the surface, you'll actually see, you look into the sky, you'll actually see both stars in the sky like this. So maybe this is a little bit smaller than it was in the movie, but they're close to each other. And if we wait for the sunset, there we go. This is what Luke Skywalker was observing from the surface of Tatooine, and there you go, nighttime. So this is the only way I found to make this system stable enough and to make it realistic enough so that it actually makes sense in the Star Wars universe and in real life as well. But we also know that this planet had 3 moons, and this is something I'm going to place right now. We don't really know much about the moons and what they looked like, or what sort of climate or atmosphere they had, but we know that they were relatively small, so we're going to place 3 smaller moons right here. And there we go. So we have 3 moons orbiting around Tatooine, and the first one is called Gomras San, second one is called Guermassa, and the third one is called Cheninia. We're going to go closer to them just to see what they look like on the surface and what Tatooine looks like from their surface as well. So this is the first moon, and the second moon, and of course the third moon as well. So there you go. This is the beautiful view of Tatooine from the third moon from this system. Now let's actually talk a little bit more about Tatooine and its history as well, and start with the fact that, well, as a desert planet, we know that there's absolutely no water on it. The only water is actually present only in the atmosphere. So the entire human community on Tatooine is essentially so-called water farmers, where they try to use these water extractors to try to produce water from the atmosphere, or basically from any kind of moisture left over in the atmosphere. There's also a lot of really interesting native species on this planet. So Jawas are one of them, the little creatures that are basically the scavengers of this planet now. And what they do for a living is essentially scavenge remains of all kinds of mining operations or crashed spaceships that came too close to this planet. Now, the mining operations are here because historically this planet was actually a mining colony that was at some point successful, but then people realized that there was nothing on the inside and only the surface was covered with precious metals. And so most people left the planet and left their equipment behind. We also have Tusken Raiders, which are the people that essentially torture Anakin Skywalker's mother, but we also get to see them in various different scenes in the series. And these are essentially the tribal people native to this planet. And after Anakin Skywalker ends up destroying one of the tribes, they actually start fearing Skywalkers as a kind of an evil spirit, and they actually even create a kind of a spiritual ritual to try to ward off the evil Skywalker demon that killed the entire tribe. Now, of course, this planet is very, very important for Star Wars universe, and specifically because both Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, and also Obi-Wan Kenobi actually resided on this planet. So Anakin was born here, and as we know from the story, Anakin didn't have a father, and the theory is that he was created by the midichlorians, which are of course the little creatures that reside in Force users in Star Wars universe. And one of the theories is that it's very likely that he was a little experiment of the most powerful Sith in the universe, known as Darth Plagueis, or is it Plagueis? Anyway, so this guy is mentioned by Darth Sidious in one of the Star Wars movies, and he was the master of Darth Sidious, so powerful in fact that he could create life. He could use Force to create life, and which is why Anakin Skywalker tries to acquire this power and wants to save his loved Padme, and wants to basically acquire this power and becomes a Sith. And so the theory behind Anakin Skywalker is that this Darth Plagueis actually possibly created him, which is why he had no father, which is why only the mother is ever mentioned in the series. But of course, just like many theories, this is just a speculation right now, and we might not even find out if this is true until sometime in the future when new Star Wars come out. So this planet is also, of course, the home planet of Luke Skywalker, who was brought here by Obi-Wan Kenobi to try to protect him from Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. And Luke grew up on a moisture farm, and he was raised by his extended family, and specifically this was actually the stepson of his mother, Shmi Skywalker, and he obviously had no idea that he was a Force user, and Obi-Wan Kenobi tried to protect him from all of this. But obviously the fate caught up with him when two little droids, R2-D2 and 3CPO, crashed on this planet. And we can actually simulate a little crash here. And here comes the little crash, and as they crashed on this planet, ooh, things go wrong. I don't know what just happened, but the planet started spinning a little bit faster than it should have. This is, by the way, Alpha 18, and I think there's been new additions, but also new bugs introduced into the game. And one of the bugs is that you'll notice that some of my objects start wobbling too much. I don't know what's happening here, but you can kind of see the wobble as I move around. And yeah, now my Tatooine is spinning a little bit too fast. I need to slow it down a little. And so anyway, as these droids crashed on the planet, the Skywalker family decided to purchase them, and this is how the entire series starts. This was from Star Wars The New Hope, episode 4. Interestingly, what most people forget is that 3CPO was actually made by Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker's father. So when 3CPO returns to Luke Skywalker, it's kind of a interesting reunification of his father's creation, and obviously Luke Skywalker, who has no idea that 3CPO was made by his father on this planet. So Tatooine is also the birthplace of 3CPO. Now, this planet also has some really interesting wildlife. So there is something called Sarlaccs, which are not just on this planet, but in other planets as well. But on this planet, Sarlacc is the large creature that swallows Boba Fett when Luke Skywalker tries to save Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. And Sarlaccs are actually plants. It's not even an animal, it's a plant that just sits there and swallows things as they fall into it. And one creature that I would really like to see in one of the future movies that still we haven't seen in any of the series and is only present in Star Wars video games is, of course, the Krayt Dragon. This is a huge animal, huge carnivorous animal that is essentially the most dangerous animal on this planet. And the only time we hear it being mentioned is when Obi-Wan Kenobi actually simulates the sound of Krayt, a Krayt dragon, to try to scare off the Tusken Raiders when Luke Skywalker is attacked by them. So this is the only time we even realize that Krayt dragon actually is a thing on this planet. But if you've ever played any games with Star Wars universe in them, you may have seen the size of that creature. It's actually really, really huge, and it'd be nice to see it sometime in this series. And in terms of politics, this planet is actually controlled by the Hutt cartel, so it's sort of a criminal mastermind that controls this planet. And of course, this criminal mastermind was Jabba the Hutt. But after his murder by Leia Skywalker, who actually strangles him during the rescue of Han Solo. This planet was now sort of liberated and became without any kind of leadership, but of course one of the Hutts will probably take over this planet at some point, and it will most likely return to being a criminal sort of base for one of the Hutts or some other criminal that decides to settle here and call this planet their home. But considering the iconic images from this planet and how beautiful it actually looks in Star Wars, most people don't actually realize that a lot of these images are from our planet Earth. So most of the things that we see on Tatooine were shot in a country called Tunisia, and of course most of them are still available, and you can actually go there and take pictures with these little clay houses or other structures that you see in the movies in real life. And I've posted a link in the description below that shows you on Google Maps a link to each of these locations that we see in the movies as well. And interestingly, Tatooine is actually the name of a town in Tunisia, which is sort of what this planet is named after. And so is Naboo, and both Naboo and Tatooine are little places in Tunisia that actually exist in real life. And I think this is all I wanted to mention about Tatooine and about its importance in Star Wars universe. And while I'm watching Alpha 18 causing some bugs here to my beautiful Tatooine, let's actually watch Gormassa smack into Tatooine as it approaches it. And this actually happened by itself. I didn't really do anything to it, and it's clearly a bug in the game that is relatively fun to watch. Look at what it's doing. It's actually okay, that's normal, that's absolutely normal, but it's being swallowed by Tatooine, and there we go, it's gone forever. So yes, and essentially this is what would happen if one of the moons of Tatooine decided to pay a close visit to the planet and smack into it. It's moving a little bit too fast, and we're gonna decrease its speed. And interestingly, this little collision even brought water to this planet now, so we now have clouds and a little bit of water on the surface, but we're going to remove this just to make it more realistic, because Tatooine has no water except for some of it in the atmosphere. So essentially, this is what I wanted to talk about in this video. I wanted to mention Tatooine and its importance in the series, and tell you a little bit more about the actual solar system where Tatooine is located, talk about its moons, and obviously give you a little bit of history behind this planet and how it might actually come back in one of the future Star Wars series. Hopefully I didn't spoil anything for you, and hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe, share it with your friends, like it, and also post a comment below about any other facts about Tatooine that you may know and I haven't mentioned. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll game you guys later. And as always, I'll see you in the next video, and bye bye.